Tonight, hear about what was discussed at this year's G20 summit, which Pittsburgh company is employing a new vaccine mandate, and your weekly weather forecast. All this and more coming up on NewsNight. Welcome to NewsNight. I'm Claire Lindsay. The International Handball Federation has recently been getting widespread criticism for its uniform regulations. Earlier this year, the federation fined the Norwegian women's beach handball team for wearing shorts instead of bikini bottoms. The shorts were considered improper clothing. Since then, the federation has been under immense pressure to change their regulations. A new set of regulations has been issued stating that women must wear short, tight-fitting pants. The regulations also stipulate that women are to wear tank tops as opposed to crop tops, which were previously required. One member of Norway's beach handball team, Julie Aspeland Berg, told a CNN reporter that, quote, "We just want to be treated at the same level as the guys," end quote. Though the rules were changed, there are still differences between the women's and men's regulations. Men's teams are not required to have tight-fitting uniforms. Regardless, athletes around the globe are celebrating the defeat of the sexist regulations. The Norwegian Handball Federation has been advocating for the change of this regulation since 2006. The Norwegian Handball Federation's president said this year was a tipping point. He also called their victory a real and symbolic step towards dismantling inequality in the sport. A few weeks ago, astronomers discovered radio waves coming from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. This energy signal was found using a radio telescope located in Australia named the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder, or ASCAP for short. However, since the waves are unlike anything experts have studied before, they are now being observed internationally using radio telescopes in New South Wales in South Africa. The signal has only been detectable at random moments, but scientists are working to develop the Square Kilometre Array, the world's largest radio telescope, within the next decade, and will most likely discover the energy wave's origin once the telescope can be used. Leaders from all over the world met in Italy last week to discuss many pressing issues, such as vaccination rates and climate change. Nick Konopka has the story.
This past weekend, leaders from 20 of the world's largest economies came together in Rome as a part of the 2021 G20 summit. Last year, the lack of a COVID-19 vaccine forced world leaders to meet over video conference, making the 2021 summit the first in-person meeting since 2019. Despite the return to normalcy, the pandemic was still a topic of discussion between the nations. Following suit with the World Health Organization, the countries vowed to have a 70% global vaccination rate by mid-2022, a considerable goal as the current vaccination rate sits at 50% after almost a year of deployment. The topic of climate change produced less concrete commitments between the nations, with countries such as China and Russia even pushing their emissions goals back 10 years to 2060. More climate talks are to be had, however, as the nations are set to meet at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Scotland through November 12th. The most substantial area of discussion between the nations was on the matter of taxation, where for the first time ever, the world leaders agreed to a global minimum tax rate of 15% for multinational corporations. This plan is intended to mitigate the use of offshore tax havens that allow businesses to avoid paying a combined amount of $150 billion annually. The agreement itself is only the first step, as presidents and prime ministers alike must convince their legislatures to sign this proposal into law, something that will prove challenging for President Biden here at home.
Tesla is making big steps to open up new possibilities within the electric vehicle industry. The pilot, beginning with 10 Netherlands charging locations, will allow non-Tesla electric vehicles to be charged at the Tesla superchargers. A spokesperson for the company stated on Tuesday, quote, "This move directly supports our mission to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy," end quote. Drivers that own electric vehicles such as BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Ford, and Volkswagen will be required to create a Tesla account and then searching for participating charging locations. There's expected to be additional costs for non-Tesla users. Coming up after the break, hear which state had a request shut down by the Supreme Court. Also, we'll have more national news, like what Pittsburgh neighborhood is reaching national news. Stay tuned.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, and welcome back to NewsNight. Most of the student body of the Pittsburgh Public School.
Some of the United States allies.
Thursday, the FBI was seen raiding.
Let's get started with today's forecast.
Today's high will only reach about 31 degrees.
It's looking a little cooler than we've seen in the past few weeks.
All this and more.
All this and more
All this and more coming up on NewsNight.
coming up on NewsNight.
Coming up on NewsNight.
Halloween has passed, but some parts of the country are still plagued with hundreds of spooky eight-legged creatures. The state of Georgia has been experiencing the arrival of hundreds of Joro spiders. The arachnid is not native to Georgia or even the United States. Joro spiders are native to East Asia. These red, black, and yellow beauties can grow up to 3 inches across. Despite their large bodies, they are not interested in battling it out with humans. Instead, they are focused on building intricate webs. They first appeared in the United States in 2013, and it's believed that they hitched a ride on a storage container from China or Japan. Since their arrival, Joro spiders' numbers have flourished. Experts are saying that while you can kill them, Joro spiders are here to stay. Most of them are expected to die as temperatures drop in November. Researchers say, however, they will come back as abundant or even more next year and are expected to spread across the South. There are many questions about the impact that Joro spiders will have on the environment. There are very few answers to these questions. One thing is sure, though, and that is Georgia residents are creeped out. One Georgia homeowner, Anthony Trendle, launched JoroSpider.com to help Georgians understand these eight-legged beauties. One Bloomfield man had an interesting way to deal with a stranger outside of his house, resulting in a broke windshield and several assault charges. Aaron Ute has more.
A man threw a pumpkin at a woman's head after she parked in front of his family's home on Wednesday, October 20th in Pittsburgh's Bloomfield neighborhood, police say. The woman was bleeding when an officer got to the Pearl Street to investigate the incident, which happened at around 4:30 in the afternoon. James Gazis, who is 40 years old, admitted to throwing 2 pumpkins when he came out of his house after hearing his wife screaming outside. She was yelling about the car being parked in front of their home and claimed it had almost hit their child, but according to surveillance video from the city and the criminal complaint, this did not happen. The driver was still inside the car when Gazis threw the first pumpkin, which was a white one, the complaint said. The second one, a large orange pumpkin, went through the driver's window, hitting the woman in the head. The driver told police that she parked a few doors down from her son's house where she was going to pick up her grandchild. The driver's son also confronted Gazis after the thrown pumpkin, and the 2 men got into a fistfight, police say. Gazis was charged and arrested with aggravated assault and propulsion of missiles.
The United States agricultural company Junior Simplot Company, based in Idaho in affiliation with Plant Sciences Incorporated, has released plans for gene-edited strawberries that will have a longer shelf life. The company previously proved successful in gene editing potatoes that are resistant to a specific disease that can cause potato famine. Now they are working on a way to make strawberries stay fresh longer and have a longer growing season. With 35% of strawberries discarded each year due to spoilage, the genetically modified berries will help minimize food waste. The CRISPR technology allows scientists to make small, precise changes in strawberry genes that would take years of traditional breeding to get the same outcome. The inserted genes will be from other strawberries with desirable traits that allow them a longer shelf life. With Junior Simplot's rights to using the CRISPR technology and Plant Sciences' access to over 50 strawberry varieties, They hope to have longer-lasting gene-edited strawberries on shelves in a few years. The Supreme Court shut down one state's request for COVID vaccine exemption after it was deemed required for healthcare workers statewide. Nick Konopka has the details.
On Friday, the Supreme Court rejected a request to block Maine's vaccine mandate on the grounds of religious freedom. The request came after the state of Maine added COVID-19 to their list of required vaccinations for healthcare workers. This led to several healthcare workers requesting an emergency injunction from the court that would allow them to be exempt from taking the vaccine on religious grounds. The court, however, sided with the state, making this mandate legal. This is a surprising move from the court, which has repeatedly ruled in favor of religious exemptions. Most notably, the court ruled that states cannot impose restrictions on large gatherings in places of worship in states like California, New York, and even Maine. Conservative Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett sided with the more liberal Justice Breyer to block the request for religious exemptions, citing a lack of oral argument for the case. The three most conservative members of the court, Justices Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, wrote a fiery 8-page dissent in favor of the religious exemptions. They argued that the exemptions were valid due to the fetal cells used to make the vaccines, stating, quote, Maine's decision to deny religious exemption in these circumstances does not just fail the least restrictive means test, it borders on the irrational, end quote. The court has only rejected the emergency injunction on the case, so the mandate may yet be struck down in a future case when it can be argued before all 9 justices.
After the break, we'll have your local Pittsburgh news. Hear about the tragic death of a community member in the hands of police, and hear what Pittsburghers are doing about COVID-19. We'll all be right back. Last month, a man was tasered in Bloomfield following an incident with the police. The man, who was later identified as 54-year-old Jim Rogers, died the following morning at the hospital. Police were called to Harriet Street the morning of October 13th to respond to a report of a man attempting to steal a bicycle. That man was Jim Rogers, and during the course of his arrest, police said Rogers became non-compliant. Following a physical struggle that was caught on video by a resident of Bloomfield, Rogers was tasered. However, the owner of the bicycle stated that she was selling the bike and told Rogers he could ride it to test it out. Following his death, Rogers supporters rallied to demand justice and answers. They say Rogers was tased multiple times. He also was taken to the hospital several miles from the scene instead of the hospital right around the corner. While the killing is being investigated, the number of times Rogers was tased has not been released, nor has his manner of death. Mayor Peduto has said there needs to be a thorough review of the city police force taser guidelines. Some are calling for the officer who deployed the taser to be fired. Of the 3 officers on the scene, 1 has been identified by the citizens. The officer who tased Rogers is Officer Keith Edmonds. The other 2 officers have not been identified. As of now, the officer has not been disciplined and has been placed on paid administrative leave as the investigation continues. Supporters are holding rallies and vigils to commemorate the life of Rogers. The Cash App has been set up for the family of Jim Rogers, named Justice for Jim Jim. On the topic of COVID-19 vaccines, one Pittsburgh company just released its new requirements for employees. Aaron Ute has the story.
With an uptake in COVID-19 cases in Pittsburgh, Highmark Health is taking a step to protect its employees and the city. On Thursday, October 21st, the company announced that it is requiring all of its employees to be fully vaccinated against the coronavirus by December 8th. Officials from Highmark Health said all employees must be fully vaccinated with one of the 3 approved COVID-19 vaccines unless they have a medical or religious exemption. A statement from Highmark Health stated that, quote, "This deadline is part of the new mandate that requires vaccination for all employees of federal contract. Highmark Health, Highmark Incorporated, and Allegheny Health Network qualify as contractors due to participation in several federal programs," end quote.
A Homewood bar was raided by federal agents at night on Wednesday, October 27th. This was because it was connected to a local biker gang called the Sin City Disciples. This gang was originally formed in 1967 in Gary, Indiana. Members of the gang have, quote, "allegedly engaged in acts of violence, extortion, trafficking, and stolen property and narcotics distribution," end quote. Federal officials explained that this investigation originally began as a murder for hire scheme in Indiana. This is because 2 members of the gang were allegedly used a gun to kill a woman. So far, 15 members have been arrested and charged across a number of Mid-Atlantic and Midwest states. As a part of the raid, 54-year-old Richard White was arrested. Everyone arrested has been charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Coming up, some good news about turtles and your weekly weather report. Stay tuned.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening and welcome back to NewsNight. Most of the student body of the Pittsburgh Public School.
Some of the United States allies.
Thursday, the FBI was seen raiding.
Let's get started with today's forecast.
Today's high will only reach about 31 degrees.
It's looking a little cooler than we've seen in the past few weeks.
All this and more
All this and more
All this and more coming up on NewsNight.
coming up on NewsNight.
coming up on NewsNight.
Halloween may be over, but fall has just begun. Craig Frakowski has what you can expect this coming week.
Thanks, Claire. Let's take a look at today, Saturday, November 6th. The high for today is going to be a brisk 54 degrees. Thankfully, we'll be seeing a lot of sun today, but don't let it deceive you. The low for tonight is going to be 32 degrees, but thankfully, even the temperature is that low, the probability of snow is less than 5%. The day will be full of plenty of sunshine. Now let's take a look at what we can expect for the second week of November. This week will start cooler and it will warm up towards the end of the week. We'll be seeing a lot of sun this week, thankfully. Thursday and Friday are the only days where the sun will be hidden behind some clouds. Luckily, we're not seeing any predictions of snow yet. The high temperature for the week is this Thursday with a high of 66, and the lowest point of the week will be today at 54 degrees. The highest chance of rain this week will be Friday with 35%, so keep an eye on that. That's all I have for you this week. Back to you, Claire.
There is now a dramatic increase in nesting sites of sea turtles as conservation efforts in West Africa pay off. The West African nation of Cape Verde has recorded a sizable increase in their number of loggerhead sea turtle nests on its beaches. According to data collected by the Cape Fernandina Ministry of Agriculture and Environment, the archipelago's total number of turtle nests increased from 10,725 in 2015 to almost 200,000 in 2020. The Cape Verdean Minister of Agriculture and Environment, Gilberto Silva, said that, quote, Cape Verde has become the second most important point for the laying of sea turtles in the world. And that quote with the environmental education watching over 180 kilometers of beaches and applying new legislation that criminalizes hunting and consumption of turtles. The catch rate has decreased significantly from 8.25% in 2015 to 1.54% in 2020, end quote. That's all we have this week. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Claire Lindsay, and from everyone here at NewsNight, have a wonderful and safe evening.